Welcome back to the Transforming Basketball podcast. We've got a focus on Sweden today. In the last episode, we spoke with Anton Kallian, and now we've got Andrew Pleick and Rikard Aspegren, basketball developers from the Swedish Basketball Federation. So, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. Really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for having us. Good to be here.
So, guys, first question is, for the benefit of the listeners, could you just explain your role and what it actually means to be a basketball developer for the Swedish Basketball Federation?
Me or you, Andrew?
Go ahead, buddy.
Okay. Yeah, our role is really to I will say it's two things mainly. We help clubs and coaches in Sweden in terms of how they should develop their basketball. How to be better in basketball and how to do good practices, and just be there for the coaches. So we do clinics, we do stuff in clubs, but we also do we have a newsletter, we have podcasts, and so on. And the other part is we work within the federation, that we preach what we teach, and that we do so we see that all the departments in the federation are in line what we want to do and our framework for player development. So yeah, mainly is that.
I would also add a third part that we're also always looking ahead to the horizon, like what is the next step for us? So implementing the stuff that's in place today, but also discussing and viewing, okay, what does the future entail for us when it comes to basketball development, coach development, player development. So where we're at today, helping the clubs, but also looking ahead.
Excellent. I think I'm always struck by just how incredibly active you guys are. And I don't believe that there's many federations who are doing as much from a coach development standpoint, just in terms of the podcast you guys have, the blogs, and then just the sheer number of clinics that you're organizing. And obviously had the pleasure in the summer, I think, really, for me, I think it was probably the first basketball clinic, coaches clinic in the whole world where it was actually aligned with, looking at contemporary skill acquisition ideas and, not just having one speaker coming in, sharing this, but many. And it was just an amazing feeling to be part of that. So I think the biggest change, and I've been coming to Sweden for many years now, and you guys are a big reason why, as well as, other great people in Swedish basketball, but you had a big change a few years ago. I don't know, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, where the player development framework you mentioned, Rikard, was introduced. And it was a big change to, what existed previously. So could you guys just speak a little bit about what that framework entails and why the federation felt a need to move in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, that journey started before me and Rikard got employed, and hats off to them. I mean, they were super brave. They were able to just take a step into not the unknown, but into an area that was uncharted for us. The federation wanted to make a change. They wanted to put more science behind how we do things. Before it was a lot of based on experience of just this is how basketball's always been played, always been run, but what's really the science behind it? So they really dug deep into, okay, what is player development and what does that entail, and what steps does Swedish basketball want to take? How do we want to associate with our players, our clubs, our coaches? Are we only trying to win medals, or are we also trying to develop people? So they really laid a foundation of how we interact with our players and our coaches and those around. And then, obviously there's been some big influences on the way. Canada basketball has been huge in our journey. We took a few trips, which I was able to take part in, visiting Mike McKay in Canada basketball and seeing what they had done. Then there were some other federations and other sports. We looked at Belgium soccer, football. And also I think Swedish sports in general is also in this shift. So there was this shift happening. We just happened to maybe be one of the first ones in that, as challenging as it is. I don't know if you want to add.
Yeah, I will say that we have like a framework before, or a player development like program, but that was like outdated, and I think in several years they haven't like do any update to it. So they could little bit like the starting like just should we just like do some, can we just do small things, and then like the started to like see on it, and it's okay now no we have to do like a big shift maybe. So Anton, that you had like you talked to in podcast before, they asked him like if it will this be like science-based, more than science, what should which like direction should we do it, and I think in Swedish basketball in general we have been pretty brave. Like is something that we like, even if like how we play with our younger kids, that was a shift in Sweden. Like we was one of the first federation that like changed our how should kids play. So we play 4 against 4 and so on. And now all the sports in Sweden are playing a difference with the younger. So I think it's a little bit that we used to to be brave also.
Sure.
To take that direction. So yeah, it was on that.
I also want to give you credit for this, Alex, too. I mean, you've been also huge in our journey and monumental in that. You know, when we started this, we obviously started looking around at people that could help us, and you know, Mike McKay's name came up, your name came up very early, and obviously, you know, we've been able to use you a lot and a lot of stuff, and it's been huge for the strides that we've made. Because, you know, I mean, this is tough. It is challenging. Obviously, when you're a country who maybe doesn't have the most success in its sport, and you take these or you make these changes, there are going to be certain critics, certain people who question it. So to bring in people like yourself to help sell the cause and are able to do that in such a way, it's been huge for us. So we're super thankful.
I really appreciate that. I really admire the work you guys are doing. So it's always a pleasure to help however I can. So I think this is why we're having the conversation. You know, I think more federations have maybe been interested, or they're reluctant. They know that this approach can be so beneficial in so many ways, but maybe they're reluctant to go all in. And that's why I just think it's amazing that you guys have done that. So I just want to look at practically kind of what this looks like. So the framework is basically a document which is given to every coach in Sweden for free at all levels. And then in addition to that is a bunch of video material. So like small-sided games, video libraries, constraint manipulation, so coaches can understand what it looks like. And then, of course, there's an enormous amount of clinics. You guys are going around Sweden the whole time, delivering clinics, bringing guest speakers in. So would you say that's kind of, I've done it justice, kind of just describing how you guys are bringing that framework to life?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think a little bit that was about like the biggest, like, because they launched the framework and they had some clinics in Sweden, but then like the next step, a little bit like, okay, we're not reaching out to all the coaches in Sweden. So I think like why they employed us, one part of it was that, okay, how can we implement this in Swedish basketball? So yeah, I think that's the correct describing it. But we also know that like this is something we discussed a lot, like how much like drills should we like show them, like because we want them to be able to create like out of their own context. So should we like give them a lot of like drills, and they just use the drills and not know why they use the drills? But I think we have landed at that like we need to show them how they can do it. Andrew, if you want to take the
yeah, I mean, this was a great insight for us. I remember the first clinic that me and Rikard did together. You know, we came to club, and obviously we always introduced the theory behind it, theoretical, the research.
Yeah.
And we tried to present the ideas, and then we asked them then to go out and create some practice activities to show the theory, to put into practice.
Fantastic.
And right away, they fell into old habits of isolated block training, isolated technique training.
And even if they like tried, like I take the 3-man weave, and they are starting to try to do it more representative, but it just became like, but why are you using this drill?
Yeah.
So then we were like, after a few clinics like that, and after a few visits to clubs, we just went back to the drawing board and said, okay, what are we going to do here? Like, this isn't working. It just seems they're frustrated. They're not getting it. We're spending 2-3 hours with the club and we're just not getting any progress. And then there was a great analogy that we saw that we got from Mike McKay, and he said, sometimes we can look at coaches as cooks or chefs.
Yep.
And when they're cooks, you might have to give them a recipe to follow. Then when they become chefs, you can just tell them the ingredients. And for this, we had assumed that everybody was a chef, and not understanding that most likely the volunteer coaches who are parents who just come on a Tuesday right after work, haven't put much into their leadership development or coach development, they're most likely cooks. They need a recipe book to help them along the way. So we just changed the way we would visit clubs, where we would introduce the theory, and then we would go out and show what it was in practice. And we got a much better result off of it and feedback. And then our second visit, we would ask them to then create practice activities, or we could even do that through Teams or Zoom meetings, where they would just introduce certain practice plannings, and we would talk about it and discuss it. But then they had more meat on the bone to discuss.
Yeah.
So we were almost jumping ahead of ourselves, because we were so eager to just let them to self-explore and development. We had to give them something to understand. So
we also have a coach program. Do you want to touch upon that, Andrew?
Yeah, that was along with the other things that you mentioned with clinics and meeting with coaches or visiting clubs. We also started a specific coach program for selected coaches in certain age groups. It was under 13, under 14, and they were with us for, I believe, 6 weeks.
Yeah.
We would have weekly check-ins where they would send practice plannings, go through their practices. They would film. They would get individual feedback. Certain weeks we'd talk about offensive drills or defensive drills, and then we'd go into, okay, what do you say during a game? What do you say before practice? What's we would just go through all the aspects of it. And we saw tremendous development in those coaches, where you really got the hands-on, where they got the support to understand, okay, what does this mean? What is CLA? What is constraints-led approach? Like in theory, but also in practice. And how is that implemented into my context? What does that look like for my team of my 25 players that come 2-3 times a week? What does that mean?
So we divide them in like WhatsApp groups, and they just post some what they do on the practice there, and we give them feedback. In the beginning, we give individual feedback, and in the end, we give so everyone can see, and everyone else could also give feedback. And I think that was a little bit to be a little bit deeper, the deeper understanding, because when we are in a clinic, it's like often it's a little bit like, okay, yeah, this is inspiration, this is a drill I can use, but maybe they don't really do the shift. They understand maybe that they should maybe have more defense in drills or something like that, but to be able to really get feedback to the coach in this way, I think it was really successful.
I love that. And it's amazing how active you guys are. So this is a question I'm always interested in. How do you typically introduce these ideas and the complexity of things like ecological dynamics, the constraints-led approach? Where would you guys typically start if you were, working with a volunteer coach for the first time and they've never been exposed to these ideas?
Well, first it's understanding why we want to do, why would we do it different? Because the reality is, if I just can explain this, the reality is it's easier for a coach to put 2 players in a corner and have them just pass the ball back and forth. It's easier for me to ask 25 players, stand and dribble with your right hand for 10 minutes. That's very easy for me as a coach. But if we look at how much fun is that for the players and how effective is that in their player development? So we try to understand, okay, what's the reason for having our practices in general? One is we want to develop players. Another could be that we want the sport to grow. We want physical activity. We want the kids to be smiling and enjoying themselves. We want connection among players. So if we understand these are the reasons why we actually have basketball practice.
And injury free also.
Injury free. If we understand those reasons why, then we can go about, okay, well, what does that look like in the most effective way? So first they have to, if they don't buy into that why, then we're never going to sell them. If they're not interested in making kids enjoy themselves and they want to develop and they're having a very limited time to do so and to be more effective, if they're not interested in that, then it's hard for us to sell this idea. If they are interested, then we can go about showing, okay, these are ways we can go about it. The science will show us the most effective way when it comes to skill acquisition is putting in environments that's representative, where there's decision making, the challenges are in level with their skill. So and that's just how we go about, okay, that's how we would go about it. That's what it looks like in practice. But the why is probably the most important. If they don't buy into that, if they're not interested, then it doesn't really matter. So once people are on board of that, it's And
I will say, like in the start, we don't talk about the theory behind it really. We don't talk about CLA. We don't talk about like nonlinear pedagogy. We like in the beginning we do that also. Like we give them the theory, but we shift that also because we see that they just concern on the practice on Monday. Like what should I do in practice on Monday? So the theory behind it, maybe we talk about that with our educator or with our national team coaches, but with like a coach that is here for the first time, we often just introduce this is the way we like the federation think you should do it. This is an effective way to do it, and you can have a better practice on Monday. And just that it's more fun, like it's very easy to sell when it's more fun for the kids, and like they can enjoy themselves more, and they can develop better basketball players. So
I love that. Great example of meeting coaches where they're at as well. So during this journey, what would you guys say are some of the biggest challenges you've had to coaches adopting more of a constraints-led approach within their practices? And have you guys got any good examples of maybe how some of those challenges have been overcome?
Yeah, I mean, I think most coaches that have been around, I'll say this, coaches that have been around longer are obviously, it's harder for them to adapt to new ideas because certain ideas and certain ways of practicing have been very successful. I define successful in their terms of successful. And they've been doing a certain way for so long a period of time. So for them, it's been hard to make any change. Change is always hard. For the newer coaches coming in, it's been very easy to sell because this is just how we practice basketball. This is how we just teach it. This is how we learn basketball. But the more experienced group, those have been probably the most challenging to adapt it because they are so sold on this idea that everything has to be built like pieces of Lego, one piece at a time before you get the entire house. They can't.
And I think also that the problem is that they believe that the day that you're doing is like it's based on what's working, and the things we say this is research. They don't know that this is two research theories, and they use like the old one. And I think like so when we talk about our like really deep with these guys, you can't really. It's hard to like discuss with them because they use like the other theory to explain
information processing. Yeah,
exactly,
and that's pretty hard. Sorry,
or they'll refer to countries who still haven't adapted to this, and they'll say, well, if we're so good, how come other countries who are better than us are doing that? It's almost like
I see that one a lot.
not understanding maybe how good those countries would be if they did adapt it. They're just looking
Oh, absolutely.
at results oriented. So that's been the without a doubt the biggest challenge. Then the second one is like I mentioned before, since so many of our coaches and our volunteers, they do that as long as their kid is in the sport, that maybe only there once or twice a week, for them to take in this theory, to understand it and apply it, is very demanding. And this is where we come in, and into our roles of helping them in that. But it is challenging. It is hard. I mean, I can only relate to myself, the teams that I've coached. And when I first started coaching, you have to be much more aware of, and that, that understanding, okay, what's the next step for this team? What's the next step for this player? How do I alter the drill or the practice, the activity? How do I challenge them at their level? I have to be so attuned and locked in at all times.
And I think also the problem has been that, like, before the framework, we did some shift in our educations before that, and we like, it's the same at like the FIBA, like coaching and education, or we call it, on their website. They describe two perspectives, like more technical oriented or more game based.
Okay.
So in the beginning, we talk a lot about game based before the framework was there. So the coaches also believe that this is just game based.
Yeah.
And then, like, we often have to say, no. This is just game based. Like, so some of them just believe that, we want to play a lot of games. But that's like, this is bigger than that.
Yeah, it is. It's the classic games approach versus CLA. And I get that one a lot too, where people point to successes of countries like Serbia, Lithuania, which are obviously very much based on traditional coaching. And I can say this, I've got a lot of Lithuanian friends and a lot of Serbian friends. And it's, it's not because of that, it's in spite of that. And I think actually within the CLA, it's accounted for when we look at forms of life. And, these are societal kind of socio-cultural historical constraints in particular communities or countries as a whole, which lead to players expressing themselves in a particular way. And another good example is Brazilian football, so it's not because of the coaching, but it's because of how powerful society is. For instance, the popularity of basketball, the number of players, the number of practice opportunities. And what this does is all these things combine to create a landscape where it's incredibly conducive for developing effective basketball players. So obviously, if the coaching was contemporary, like you said, Andrew, imagine what the results could be. It could be even more.
Can you imagine USA basketball if they had applied this? Like how scary that would be.
No one would catch the US, and it's
and that's I think you mentioned Lithuania and Serbia. I would say the US, due to the social media, NBA. All the individual coaches that are on social media, their influence of looking, well, look, they have 30 people standing by themselves dribbling in a row. Yeah. If they do that and they're the top country in the world, then who are we to criticize that? And I would say USA basketball has probably been the hardest one for us to overcome for others, because they look to the States for influence.
Yeah, of course.
And the individual coaches of all the one-on-one moves against chairs or cones and think, well, that's what you need to do to get better, and not that decision making versus an opponent. And if we were to simplify for us, for the coaches, I think that was the one thing, is just throw in a defender or an offense, just throw in an opponent, just put in decision making and try to adapt to their level of play.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't have to be games per se, but just create a decision-making environment for our players.
But also that, like, this, the ones that have, because in the beginning we said, like the people that have been for a long time coaching, like, okay, we don't have to focus on them. But the problem with that is that there are like real basketball ambassadors in their like community. So a lot of people like watching them and do what they say and so on. So they are important. Like they are important for us also. And maybe if they say, yeah, okay, I hear what you say, I understand the theory behind it, I understand why, but I choose to do in this way. But often they are not like willing to like take in what we say.
Yeah.
They're not willing to like, and I think it's also that you are open-minded to change the way you coach. I think some of them aren't like open for that. So the coaches that been coached for a long time, but are open and used to develop themselves, they are more easy to connect with.
Yeah, 100%. And like just going back to, we mentioned the USA framework. I mean, the moment the US, if they ever adopt evidence-informed ideas, it would be over. But you still see in like USA Basketball within their actual curriculum talks about technique mastery and not graduating from a skill, and whole parts of the curriculum focused on teaching techniques. And it's, I'm not calling anyone out, but I'm just saying we've got research available, so let's use it. And I think it's, especially as federations, I think we have a duty to make sure we're trying to give our coaches, the material which is most recent and most evidence informed as we can. And that's why I just think it makes sense to go down, this road. So I want to look a little bit at the framework, guys, because what I've seen I've reviewed a few kind of, I'd say, curriculums. I don't like the word curriculum, and that's why I like the fact that you guys call it framework. But a lot of federations call them curriculums. And what these do is they're typically incredibly linear, and it's typically based on age groups and players having to do certain things at particular ages, perform particular techniques. So, how is your framework different to what we traditionally see with federations all over the world?
I think that the word curriculum is interesting to look at, and we think about the linear aspect of it. If I look at the way we used to consider player development, is that at a certain age, like you said, you would graduate from a skill. If you could perform this technique, we would give you a little award or a medal or something, and you had to graduate that before you could try the next technique or the next skill. Similar to USA Basketball, and it became very much like a school environment. Like you had to do A before you could do B, before you could do C, and we just realized that that's not what it looks like. That's not how skill acquisition works, how development works. So we went away from this of looking at ages and just looking at that everything's nonlinear when it comes to development, when it comes to physical, social, mental, basketball, skill acquisition or development, that these are always flowing, and developing, but not at the same pace.
Yeah.
So you could have kids at the same age, but just socially, mentally, physically, they could look completely different, interact differently. So therefore, we had to understand that that development in that team is going to look different, and we have to understand that, and we have to understand the person behind it, understand where they're at in their development, and try to help them, and not assume that every 14-year-old should be able to do this, or every 17-year-old should have to do this. That it's okay, this is what we see at the end of the road, and your pathway, it might look a little different. We're going to help you along that way.
And also, I think that even if you start at the same time, because they don't, like in a regular club, like you have some people that have played for a long time, some play 2 years, but even if this started in like different age, it's just to see like this is a non-linear development, and also that like we are like a lot of people like are like the players just come to us and they can nothing. It's like they had never do anything before they come to the basketball. That's not true. Like if you have played soccer, maybe you can perform some tasks better than. So I think to see the player where they are and adapting that, I think in general, like with the old maybe traditional approach, you always starting like 1 against 0 because you like underestimate the players.
For sure.
instead of seeing, okay, where is the player?
That's so true. That's
and
a
I
great
think,
point, Rikard.
and I think that's the biggest shift with this new framework, is that we don't talk about, we have some like guidelines for different age groups, because I think that can be good.
Yeah, I agree.
And they also have some, like the physical parts. Yeah, it's certain where, if they are like where they are there, that's important to know. But in general, we'll talk a little bit about like the age of the players.
Right. And I think like it's just guidelines, and it's like you said, it's helping coaches get an idea as, maybe they're a volunteer under 14 coach. Here are some ideas for principles of play at the under 14s age group. Boom. There you go. It's not saying these are the techniques we got to be teaching at under 14s. And that's a huge difference to me. So I guess
I want to also
yeah.
add, sorry, Miles. I think the biggest sell, or the biggest thing that we really push, is understanding your context. What does your context look like? So, and that's why we use the word framework. Like, this is the framework we want, but understand you're applying this to your context. So, is it 20 17-year-old girls that want to play in the WNBA, or is it 15 12-year-old boys that are just there for social reasons?
Yeah.
Understand your context. And I think a lot of these curriculums assume that everyone has the same reason for being there, the same goal for being there. That's what everybody wants to make a national team, or everybody wants to stand on the podium, or everyone is there for this reason or that reason. And this is where we want the coaches to really identify the reasons behind their players of being there, and the reasons behind them being coaches, and then being able to apply our framework to their specific context. And that is by far the biggest reason why we want to help them. It's not, of course, we're interested in Swedish basketball growing as talent-wise, but we're more interested in that we create a positive social impact in these kids' lives. So it's really important that the coaches understand their context.
I love that, Andrew. And I think, coaches may be skeptical of the research from a skill acquisition standpoint, but we certainly cannot argue with the fact that the CLA is more fun. Yeah. And just from a transformational side, and from the perspective of developing the person and the children in this instance, we can't dispute that. So, in many of these environments where we're seeing these traditional drills, and, these environments which are not fun and not enjoyable, like you said, context. And I think if coaches maybe thought about that a bit more deeply, I think they'd be more inclined to consider, everything we're talking about here and through transforming basketball. So my last question to you guys is, what's next for what's next for Swedish basketball? And, in terms of federations who are maybe listening to this and they're a bit intrigued, why should they consider going down not the same path of you guys, because there's no copy paste, but exploring, a constraint set approach within their, frameworks and their own respective countries?
Oh, that's a big question.
It is.
I think the first thing for us, like the next thing, is also that every part of the federation is working in the same direction on this. Like for example, our youth national teams, we have lecture with them, but we haven't really said, okay, if you don't do this, you're not welcome.
Yeah.
And I think we have to get them deeper to understand what this mean. So every part of our federation, like in our own, that they do the same thing, or in line with other things that we want to do. I think that's one thing. And later, I think you will see, and we see really a growth of basketball players in Sweden. I think this will affect the amount of players we will have in a positive way, and I think that will be really important for us. I think we will see some shift, as you said before. Even if the basketball, of course, we think this will also become better basketball players, but I think also we will have a lot of more basketball players, and they will enjoy the time playing basketball.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I would say if there are federations listening to this, and they're going to implement a framework, it's monumental and imperative that every aspect of your federation is in line with that framework. And we're not there yet. This is something that we discuss and we're working on all the time. It takes time. There is a shift. And what I mean is, if you look at all the departments we have, if it's competition, if it's education, if it's national team, the way we compete, the way we educate, the way we participate in national teams, all those have to be in line with our framework. The way we, if it's the rules in competition, the way we use social media, the way we select national teams, those we have to at all times be understanding that our framework is the foundation, that it's based on, CLA when it comes to how we develop players. There's also other aspects in your framework as to how to engage into personal relationships with players or interactions with people and so forth. So for those federations listening, it's monumental that everything lives and breathes according in the same direction, because otherwise it's hard to do one thing and then the next day in other aspects are taking a different route,
And I think
can I say one thing more?
Please do, Rikard.
Also that it's like that is evidence-based is so much more easier to work with. Like when we have been on other conference with skill acquisition, this is in line with the framework. You don't have to like change word or something like that. You know that this is, so when we're out, we can always just talk about the science behind it, because we know that the framework is based on it. And a tip will be, like in our framework, some words a little bit different. So I would recommend to use the same words as used by like in science, because then it's more easier. That will, some words in our framework, like okay, because we use, for example, we use loads instead of constraints.
Yeah.
And I think so that can also be like a tip for others, that
Great
like
advice.
use the real words.
Great advice. Guys, that was a fantastic podcast. I really enjoyed our discussion. I'm huge fans of everything you're doing and just Swedish basketball in general. So really rooting for everything you guys are doing. And so thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks so much, and best of luck to you and your new endeavor here. So we're going to be following with interest and we're rooting for you. So super excited for you, Alex.
Thank you, guys.